Now we get into using some two-dimensional lists or two-dimensional arrays. Basically what that means is you have a list of lists, okay? And I structured mine here just for an example in this way, so you could kind of maybe more easily visualize kind of how this is working. So notice we declare a list with our square brackets, opening, closing square bracket, just like this, okay. So I've got my opening square bracket here, my closing square bracket here. Now remember, everything inside of it needs to be separated by a comma. So here's a list separated by a comma, another list separated by a comma, and the third list. So basically this is a list of lists, and I don't know if it may be more easily visualized like this too. You can kind of see, so here's my list, and I've got 3 elements inside this main list, which is called in2D list. So there's the second element and the third element, and then each of those elements is also a list with their own elements inside. So however is easiest for you to visualize, I've showed you both. I like this way a little bit better. So remember that we can access one element inside this list. So in 2D list, to access the first list, we use 0. So that'll return this list. Okay, it's at the first position inside the list, inside the in 2D list. So that returns this first list. Now let's say I want to return an element inside this list. Well, remember, since that's a list itself, we can access that list using another square bracket. So 0, 0. That's going to return the first list and then the first element inside that list. And if I did a 1 here, that would return the first list here, and then it would get the element at position 1, which is this value. So let's see if we can get this to work right. So here's what for 3-1, easy peasy. We pass in a two-dimensional list. You should output the third element of the second row. Okay, should be easy enough. They call it easy peasy, so hopefully it's easy. So we're going to print a value in the in2D list. Now we're going to have, since it's two-dimensional, we want to have 2 sets of square brackets to access them. So we want the second row, and it always does row first and then column. So row, column. So we want the second row, which is, remember, at index 1 because it starts at 0, and the third element. So remember, this is going to return the value of the list, the element inside the main list. So here's my in2D list. It's going to return, I've got 1 element here, 2 elements, and 3 elements. So by doing in2D list 1 at position 1, it's going to return the element inside that list at position 1, which is this list here that's highlighted. Now I want to return the third element of this list. So the third element, well, that's the first, there's the second, there's the third. That's at index 0, 1, 2. So we just come in here, put a 2 in there, and we should get 15 printed out. Let's see what happens. We'll run it, and we get 15. So there you have it. That's how you access a 2D list. Pretty easy, right? Alright, moving on. So here they pass in another two-dimensional list, and what I'm going to do is just go ahead and copy that list. You should add up all the numbers in each row and output that number. Then output the grand total of all the rows. Alright, so since we're going to have a grand total of all the rows, I mentioned this in a previous video here, adding everything up, so we want to have a variable out here, and we'll start it out at 0. Okay, that is outside of any loops or other structures. That way we can just continually add on to it. So we need to basically, let's think through here. What do we need to do? We need to add up all the elements inside this list, and then we need to add up all the elements inside this list, and then we need to add up all the elements inside this list, printing out each one as we go, and adding it to the grand total, and then printing that out at the end. Alright, so let's kind of break this down. Basically what we want to do is, we need to iterate over each list inside this, each element inside this list. So let's start with that. And I'm going to call this row in my in2D list. Okay, so what that's going to do, this first iteration, row is going to be set to this list. On the second iteration, it's going to be set to this list. So basically you can kind of see it here. This is a row, this is a row, and this is a row. So that's just kind of why I called it row. Alright, then we need to also loop through for, we're going to call this one column, in, well, my row. Okay, so remember, since this is a list, now we can iterate through that list, and what this is going to do on the first iteration, 0, or the first list, it's going to pull out this list, and that's going to be equal to row. Then I can loop through row and get each element individually. Okay, so that's kind of how you do that. This is called a nested for loop. Okay, when you have something inside of another one, it's called nested. So now, what do I need to do? I need to add up all the values inside the list. Okay, so what I'm going to do is have another variable here. We're going to do this row total, and again set that equal to 0. And then what we can do in here is for each value inside the list. Okay, so for the first iteration, it's going to get this list. That's going to be row. Then it's going to do column. So for the first iteration in this loop, it's going to be 18. So we want to add 18 to our row total. So we're going to do row total. Oops, maybe I can add that in there. Plus equals, which is the shorthand for equals row total plus some value, right? Plus column. We can shorten that by just doing plus equals. Okay, so when the first time it's going to be 18, we're going to add that to the row total. We should now have 18. We also need to add it to our grand total. Grand total plus equals column. So we'll just add that in there twice, right? In two different variables. And that'll be it. So the first iteration, it's going to get 18, then it's going to get 54, then it's going to get 3, then 11, then 25. That should all be added up into row total. Okay, and then we need to print it. So let's print our row total. Okay, and then once this finishes and it prints the row total, it's going to go back up to here, and now row is going to be set to this list. Right? Then it's going to come down in here. It's going to reset row total back to 0 for this row, and then we're going to loop through all the columns inside this row and do it all over again. And now since grand total is outside of both loops, this one will continually increment inside here, but row total will only increment inside this loop here. Okay, so now it'll print every row, and then when we're all done with both loops, we can print the grand total. Let's run it, see what happens. All right, I'm not going to go through using a calculator or anything, but that should be 111, that should be 66, and that should be 360. And then if you add those three up, I'm sorry, 183. And then if you add those three up, you should get 360. Okay, simple enough, right? Next, we need, let's see, we pass in two numbers, A and B. You should create a list with A rows and B columns. Okay, populate each cell like this. So R0, C0 for row 0, column 0, row 0, row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2, row 0, column, and so on and so forth. And then let's say you had 3 columns. So you have column 0, column 1, column 2. Then it should jump up to row 1 instead of row 0, column 0, and start all over with column 0 again. Okay, so let's think through this one. They pass in two numbers, A and B. So A equals, we're just going to do something simple here. A rows, we're going to do 3 rows, and well, why not? We'll do 5 columns. So B equals 5. All right. So we're going to have another nested for loop here. So we're going to do for I in range. We'd want to do this from 0 up to, but not including 3. That way we get each row. Oops, I want to do A just in case they give us a different number there. And then I need another loop for J, and this cannot be the same variable as this one. J in range, and now we're going to do it for each column. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to loop 3 times for each row and then 5 times for the columns inside each row. So it's going to loop a whole bunch of times. 3 to the 5th, I think. Anyway, moving on. So what do we need to do? We need to have, we need to create a list. So we forgot to create our list. We can do that here. We're going to do, I don't know, final list. And we need to set it to an empty list. Alright, what do we need to do? So in here we need to create some kind of a cell name, cell value, we'll call it cell value. Alright, and this is going to be a string, as you can see because of the quotations. So we want it to be, well, R, okay, plus the value of A, because we're in the rows, plus, and then remember, since A is an integer, and we want to add it to a string, if you were to just do this here, Python's not going to know how to add an integer and a string together, so we need to make this a string representation of A. Okay, now Python can add the strings together. Okay, and then we also need to add on the C for the column, and then the same sort of thing for the column number. Okay, so hope you're with me here. So now on each iteration, it's going to do something like this. It's going to do R, and then add in the value of A, and then do C, and then the value of B. All right. Now what do we need to do? We need to add this to the list. So if we were to just do something like this, final list dot append cell value, all right? This, you might think this would work, but in actuality, this is just going to then be a single dimensional array or list. So it's going to just add each value, and it's going to look like this instead of having 2 dimensions. So we got to modify this a little bit. Let's do, we'll just call it row. Right. So we're creating a row, and which is also going to be a list, setting it to an empty list, and then what we're going to do each time is we're just going to add that string value to our row. So row.append, and we're going to do the cell value. Okay. So what this is going to do now, we're going to loop through this range here from 0 to A, which in this case is 3. Not including 3, so it's going to do 0, 1, and 2. Then each time we're going to create a row list value, which is going to hold each name. And then we're going to start another range, another loop, with the range of 0 up to, but not including 5, or B, right, 5. So we're going to do cell value R, A is going to be 0, then 0, because they both start at 0. Then it's going to do 0, 1. Well, that's what we need, right? 0, 1, then 0, 2, then 0, 3, 0, 4. And then it's going to jump to 1, 0, because this is going to then change to 1. And then this is going to start back over at 0. And it's just going to keep doing that. And then once this is finished appending everything to the row, then we need to append that to our final list. Final list append the row. So this loop will create different elements and add them to a list here. And then what we need to do is add this list to the final list each time that finishes, right? So now print our final list, and let's see what we get. Let's clear this out and run it. There we have it. And you can see, and I'll copy this and format it so you can kind of see what's going on here. Just so I don't get any errors. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice the commas. So here we get the output that we are looking for. All right. So there's one row, and it's got. Ooh. Oh, that's what I did. Ha. Okay. So I don't want to add the value of A each time. So it's. Here we go. So you see what I did here. Everything is the exact same name. That's because I used the values that did not change, A and B. So instead, what I want to do is take I there and j there. So what's going to happen is I starts out at 0 up to a, right? So I is the one that changes from 0 to 1 to 2. So I want to take that one, put it there. So let's see what happens now now that I corrected that. Let's make sure we get the right output. Here we go. So 0, C0, R0, C1, R0, C2, 3, 4, and then it jumps to R1, C0, R1, C1, R1, C2, and so on and so forth. Now we get the right values. Okay, I hope you see what I did there, my mistake on that. See, it happens to everybody, but as long as you can look at your output, and then you can usually come back and figure out exactly what you need to fix. All right.